So, can you tell me, do you think diversity is important in the workplace?
Absolutely. It's important in a whole host of ways, some of which, we've been talking about for the last 15 years or so. But I think we learn more each year about the significance of diversity, and that diversity is more than what we initially thought. It's beyond just some of the programs and teaching. It's really a culture and a way of being within an organization.
And getting away from the laws and things like that, how do we embrace diversity in our organizations?
Well, it needs to be articulated from the top down. Top management really needs to let everyone know that this is the focus of what an effective organization should embrace, that it's not just a nice to do, that it's imperative for effectiveness, and to model that. And then to embed it in all facets of the organization. It should be a part of performance management for supervisors and for employees, and a part of the fabric of all of the training that goes on. It really needs to permeate the organization's culture as a whole.
And you've done a bit of research about engaging older employees in the workforce. There's lots of things out there, a lot of hype about Gen Y and things like that, but do you think we need to do a bit more related to our older workers?
I think that's important, and I think it's important for two reasons. One is this is a brain trust of most organizations. We have a large cohort moving through the system now who are close to retirement within the next 5 to 10 years. We could lose a lot of people we don't need to lose to organizations. There are many workers who would like to work longer. Retirement plummets may necessitate that, but a lot of people want to work later, use their skills and talents longer than they have historically. We need to create workplaces that are friendly to that kind of a retention and maximize the productivity of these employees.
And what do you mean by that? What is a friendly environment to older employees or people who maybe can't do things that they traditionally could have?
Well, first of all, it's not necessarily true that being an older worker will necessitate a diminished productivity. It certainly can happen, but it's something to pay attention to, trying to stay out in front of and try to create an environment that minimizes that potential. But it is also important that we do that because it creates a climate for the rest of the workforce to understand what inclusion is really about. We've become sensitive to stereotyping and biases for ethnic and racial minorities. We do not necessarily think about how we have biases and stereotypes about age. But they're there, and to the extent that we have them, we send out those messages to people that they are less valued, less capable, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, needlessly.
And as managers, how do we manage that for not only ourselves but for our staff?
Well, I think again, it's sending the message out there, it's modeling it. Some of the research that we have been doing here at Cornell in the ILR school has been looking at the impact of supervisors on bias and stereotyping and the sense of satisfaction of protected populations. And in this case, we were looking at disability. And it seems to be very much the case that when a supervisor models attention to, respect for certain employees, that the others follow suit in that work unit. And the individual, who is the minority in question, feels much more valued, much more integrated, has a much more positive experience, so displays higher levels of job satisfaction and a higher likelihood of retention. So that supervisor relationship is critical. So sending the message to supervisors about their role is imperative.
And is there a difference in how we manage people with disabilities compared to how we manage able-bodied people?
There shouldn't be. If we're really trying to minimize stereotypes, we really should treat everyone the same. It's important everyone feels a differential treatment, and it can negatively impact. So the important thing is to try to be very just in the processes that you use in terms of recruitment, promotional opportunities, making sure that everybody gets an opportunity. I think the thing to be aware of is that we may be less likely to think of a person who has apparent disadvantage in some way for these opportunities, and that's where the bias comes in. Everyone should have an opportunity to compete and advance when those opportunities become available.
And how do we double check on ourselves to make sure that we're not doing this, or how do we check to see if there is someone that might be eligible to improve on their career enhancement?
Well, I think two ways. I think we can certainly use our workforce statistics. I think to the extent an organization does a good job of taking a look at how long a person has been there, what kind of opportunities they've had for training, doing good performance management for all employees, but making sure that the person who is older or has a disability has equal opportunity. Good human resource practices, well executed, will take care of minimizing a lot of these biases that can occur.
And can you just expand on that human resources practices? What kind of things, what types of, what is involved in that?
Well, I'm particularly thinking of here minimizing bias, of course, is important on the recruitment and hiring processes, making sure that those processes are accessible to older workers. You're recruiting from a wide pool, and workers with disabilities, these are the populations I'm concerned about. But once in the system, making sure that you ask about with these employees as readily as you do with others in quarterly or biannual in-person meetings. What is it that your career interests are? How can we expand the effectiveness of what you do? What kind of training? Here's what we have as training opportunities. Are you interested? Making sure that the question gets asked and that people are aware of opportunities.
So you're saying working with people one-on-one, regardless of whether they're from a minority group or a majority group?
Absolutely. And it's if you think the person is more reticent or needs to be drawn out, you might want to focus attention, particularly if there's been a historical precedent that needs to be that needs to be transcended of bias, of people not getting an opportunity. Otherwise, it should be just a normal part of a good human resource processes that you're cultivating people to be able to expand their talents and to contribute more fully to the organization.
And from your research, what do good supervisors do?
They do exactly what we're talking about. The HR ripples down in terms of how they manage people. They pay attention to dynamics, their own with their individuals that they work with, the role modeling that they do in terms of the respect and the dignity with which they treat each individual. There's a no tolerance for harassment or disrespect between coworkers. A precedent is set for that sense of everyone being valued. And they do take time to check in with people about how things are going and what their interests and what they might need to be more effective within their organization.
And you said that there are still some biases in organizations. How do we change that culture if we need to change a culture within our organization?
Well, we've certainly tried training, and we shouldn't give up on that. I think diversity training can be effective, and it should include aging workforce and people with disabilities, not just racial, ethnic minorities or sexual orientation bias. It should include a broader array of interests. But beyond training only gets us so far. It is an articulation of a commitment to inclusion and diversity that permeates the whole organization. Top management needs to articulate it. It should be embedded in goals and annual reports, and it should ripple all the way down to performance dialogues with supervisors that their managers have with them about using measures of can be a culture survey, but it can also just be periodic observations of interactions with supervisors with the people that they supervise.
Great. And if you were to add one or two more things that can help health professionals who are managing people, what would they be?
Well, I think it's important for health professionals not only to think of these things as employers. I would suggest that they think about, can they recruit from pools of people that might have a higher number of older workers or workers with disabilities as they're posting positions, and be mindful of biases, inherent biases that can occur when people have obvious disabilities and they come in to interview or are an older worker. But also making their services accessible. We're focusing on the employment process, but Equitable access to healthcare services is a real big problem for people with disabilities. It's hard for them sometimes to navigate the physical facilities. Examination tables are not always accessible to people with mobility impairments or spinal cord injuries. And then there's also sometimes just a bias of how people are treated. The respect that they deserve in the interaction is not always there, particularly if they have a communication disorder or a real obvious disability that the practitioner might infer an inability cognitively or intellectually to deal with their own health care situation.
And I suppose technology is one of those things that can be used in both ways, can't it? Even within working with our clients or working with potential employees, we can use technology to discriminate or to make it easier for people, can't we?
Absolutely. And that's very true for people with disabilities and the aging workforce. Technology has been a tremendous boon for people with disabilities. They can communicate more readily with a lot of adaptive devices if they have a communication disorder. They can work from home. They can apply for positions online. But it also can preclude them from being able to apply. A lot of our recruitment now is done online, and if you're a person with a visual impairment and that website where the application process needs to occur is not accessible to screen readers, you have no way of penetrating that system. So we need to be mindful of that. These are technological fixes that don't have to occur. We can quickly transcend that if we understand what the problems are and build it into the system from the front end.
We've been speaking with Professor Susanne Bruyere. Professor Bruyere, thank you so much for talking with us. You've given me some great insights on how we can better engage older and disabled workers.
I've enjoyed it. Thanks very much.